when President Trump stared directly into Jasmine, Crockett's eyes, and delivered those 5 words that would ignite a firestorm across America. Nobody in that room could have predicted what happened next. The silence that followed was so thick, you could cut it with a knife, and what came out of her mouth in response would be replayed millions of times, analyzed by every news outlet, and turn her into a household name overnight. It was 3:20 in the afternoon on a Thursday that started like any other political meeting. The Roosevelt Room was packed with the usual suspects. Democrats clustered on one side, Republicans on the other, and President Trump commanding attention from the head of that polished conference table. The air was already crackling with tension, because nobody had come to play nice. They were there to discuss public school funding, teacher shortages, and standardized testing. Topics that always bring out the worst in Washington politics. Jasmine Crockett sat just 2 seats away from the most powerful man in the world, her notepad open, her pen ready, her mind sharp as a razor. She had been waiting for the right moment to speak. And when the conversation turned to cutting early learning grants, she saw her opening. What she did not see coming was the verbal slap that would change everything. She leaned forward slightly, her voice measured and professional, questioning the logic behind devastating cuts to programs that help the most vulnerable children in America. That is when Trump turned toward her with the kind of deliberate slowness that makes your blood run cold. He was not angry, he was not shouting, he was calculating. And then he said it. "You don't belong in this room." The words hit like a physical blow. Every person in that room froze. Senator Richard Kellman, who had been taking notes, stopped mid-sentence. The Secretary of Education's assistant looked up with visible discomfort. 2 White House interns near the doorway exchanged shocked glances but did not dare speak. Even the cameras kept rolling, capturing every excruciating second of what felt like the longest pause in political history. But Jasmine Crockett did something that nobody expected. She did not explode. She did not storm out. She did not even raise her voice. Instead, she waited. 3 seconds. Then 6. Long enough to make it crystal clear that she was choosing her moment, choosing her words, choosing her response with the precision of a surgeon. And then she spoke. "I was elected by the people, just like you, and belong here because my district sent me here, and I will stay in this room until every child in this country, no matter their zip code, has the right to learn without being forgotten." The words hung in the air like smoke after a gunshot. Trump leaned back in his chair, his lips pressed into a thin line, muttering something to an aide that nobody else could hear. But the damage was done. The room had shifted. The power dynamic had changed. And America was about to witness something extraordinary. What nobody in that room knew was that Jasmine Crockett had been preparing for this moment her entire life. She was not supposed to be in politics, at least not originally. She grew up in Shreveport, Louisiana, in a 2-bedroom house across from a junkyard, watching her mother clean other people's houses while working part-time shifts at the city library. Her father was a ghost who appeared with promises and disappeared with excuses. It was her older brother Jaden who kept her grounded, walking her home from school every day, always 3 steps behind, always watching the street like a bodyguard. When he got into trouble, serious trouble, 14-year-old Jasmine found herself in the back of a courtroom, watching a public defender fumble through her brother's case. She did not cry that day, but her fists were clenched so tight her fingernails left permanent marks in her palms. That was the moment she whispered to herself in that courthouse parking lot while her mother tried to hold it together. He deserved better. By 16, she was volunteering at legal clinics during summers. By 19, she had won her first statewide debate title. Law school was not ambition for her, it was survival. What drove her was not the desire for power, but witnessing how little protection people had when nobody knew their name. Fresh out of law school, she took public defense cases that paid almost nothing, driving 3 hours just to represent someone, being denied bail over a broken taillight ticket. Then Ferguson happened. Then Tamir Rice. Then Sandra Bland. She kept a notepad by her bed because sleep became impossible. Her brain would not stop processing the injustice she saw every single day. one night. After reading about teacher strikes in Missouri, she scribbled 3 words that would change her life. Fight from inside. She ran for state office in Texas against an incumbent who literally laughed when she announced her campaign. He called her a temporary flair in a long game. She beat him by 4 percentage points. Her congressional run came later in a redrawn district where the lines had been manipulated to bury votes like hers. She walked door to door in August heat that melted makeup off her face before noon. But people did not just see her, they listened. She spoke like someone who knew the inside of a bail hearing and the pain of watching your brother get handcuffed while your mother prayed on a courthouse bench. At every town hall, she repeated the same sentence. If I ever forget who sent me, send me home. So when she took her seat in that Roosevelt room, it was not a seat she had pulled out for herself. It had been carved out by people who had never been invited to that table in the first place. She was not there to charm or play politics. She was there to make sure their voices were heard. But that room was not built for people like her to speak freely. Not yet. She had been ignored before. Cut off mid-sentence, called emotional and aggressive for asking direct questions. She had learned to choose her battles carefully, to strike only when the words mattered more than the noise. That day with Trump was not her first time facing a man who tried to shrink the space around her, but it might have been the most public. And in her district, back in Texas, at that very moment, a group of third graders was watching the live stream with their civics teacher. They did not understand all the policies being discussed, but they caught what was said and how she responded. 1. Little girl Kamari leaned over to her friend and whispered, she did not even get mad. She just told him the truth. Their teacher paused the video and said, that is called presence. Kamari wrote Jasmine Crockett at the top of her journal. That afternoon, right next to the word possible, the clip hit social media before the meeting even ended. Someone in the press pool had isolated the moment, cut it clean, and posted it with no caption. Just 2 faces, the stillness and Jasmine's response. It spread like wildfire across every platform imaginable. Within minutes it was on Twitter, then TikTok, then YouTube. People were not just watching, they were listening. Some watched it twice. Some watched it 10 times. Because it was not just what was said, it was what it meant. The video showed Trump's face, stone-set and unmoved. Then Jasmine sitting up just a little straighter, her voice steady. Her words chosen like she had written them in her bones. Comment sections exploded. Teachers wrote things like this is what leadership looks like? A grandmother in Nebraska reposted the clip with the words she spoke for all of us today. But there were others too. Disrespectful, one man wrote. He's the president. She needs to remember that. Someone replied, she didn't yell. She didn't curse. Why does her calm truth bother you so much? By nightfall, hashtags were trending. Cable networks played it on repeat. Panelists debated tone, intent, protocol. Some tried to reframe the moment, saying Trump misspoke or meant it differently. But the footage was too clean, the words too direct. There was no editing it away. Back in her hotel room near DuPont Circle, Jasmine sat on the edge of the bed, shoes still on, blazer unbuttoned. Her phone buzzed so constantly she had to turn it face down. Messages poured in from friends, colleagues, complete strangers. One text stood out from someone she had not heard from in years. Her old high school debate coach, Mr. Henry. It was short, still proud, still watching. She smiled, but only for a second, because in her gut she knew this was not over. Opened Twitter, scanned the trending topics, then closed it immediately. She had already said what she needed to say. The rest was not hers to control. Asterisk the next morning. She walked into the green room at Good Morning America and saw the producer pull her aside with a stunned expression. You broke us, the woman whispered, holding up her phone where Jasmine's face was frozen mid-sentence on a paused video. We have never had this many segment requests for a sitting congresswoman in under 24 hours. People are calling us specifically asking for you. Jasmine did not react outwardly. She was already thinking about what to say and what not. To say when those cameras came on, she had never wanted to be famous. Influential, yes, Fame was just noise. On set, the lights were scorching, and the studio smelled faintly of coffee and floor wax. The moment that red light blinked on, she straightened her spine, crossed her ankles, and rested her hands in her lap, like she had been doing television interviews her entire life. The host leaned in, tone soft but curious. "Congresswoman Crockett, when the president said you did not belong in that room, what went through your mind?" She did not hesitate. "I have heard that message in different forms since I was a child. Sometimes it is said out loud. Sometimes it is in the silence. Either way, I do not accept it." The host nodded, but Jasmine was not finished. "I belong in every room where decisions are made about my community. I belong in rooms where budgets are cut, where futures are decided. I belong there because I was sent there." And when he said I did not, I knew he was not just talking to me. He was talking to every girl who ever got told to be quiet when she had something to say. The studio crew froze as if they knew they had just captured lightning in a bottle. Backstage, the producer mouthed wow to her assistant. The interview went viral on its own. Within hours, the clip had more views than her original response from the White House. People were not just reacting anymore, they were quoting her, posting her words on signs, printing them on shirts, turning them into art. Someone graffitied, "I belong in this room," on a boarded-up building in New York. In Kansas City, a group of teachers opened their morning meeting by watching her full answer. One teacher, a man in his 60s, said, "I have never seen someone handle pressure like that, never." In Tulsa, a mother named Rena, who had been homeschooling her 3 children after their local school lost federal funding, sent Jasmine an email. "You reminded me that someone is still out there fighting, that maybe we are not invisible after all. I do not know what you are planning next, but we have got your back." Back in Washington, her office was overwhelmed with calls, donations, volunteer signups. Even congressional colleagues who usually kept their distance suddenly wanted to be seen standing beside her. But Jasmine did not let the attention soften her focus. At a press conference later that afternoon, when asked if she felt vindicated by the support, she simply said, "This was never about going viral. It was about making sure no one confuses." Silence for agreement. "I said what I needed to say. Now I am back to work." Behind her quiet discipline, she felt the ground shifting. She had been underestimated before, but now they had to listen. Not because of a viral moment, but because millions of people had leaned in and said, "That is the voice I trust." It did not take long for the pushback to begin. By Friday morning, conservative commentators were crafting their version of the story. A popular radio host in Tampa called her response disrespectful grandstanding. Another labeled her another loud freshman with no real policy experience. On cable news, the spin was relentless. One segment showed her response on a loop, while 3 panelists argued whether she had undermined presidential decorum. Jasmine watched none of it. She was back in her district office in Dallas by then. Sitting in her room with no cameras, a styrofoam cup of coffee going cold on her desk, and a stack of constituent letters that her aide had left for her to read, she picked one up at random. It was from an elementary school counselor in Amarillo. "Thank you. Thank you for not backing down. Thank you for being calm when the rest of us were screaming at our screens. That moment made my students believe they are allowed to speak up." Another was from a janitor in Tulsa. "I clean high schools every night and hear things no politician wants to think about. But you spoke like someone who actually knows." Jasmine sat quietly for a while, letting the weight of those words settle deeper than any noise from the talking heads. But outside her office, reporters were circling. Some were respectful, others were looking for a soundbite they could twist. One reporter from a major newspaper shoved a microphone toward her as she left a parent meeting and asked, "Do you regret how it escalated?" Jasmine looked at her with the same cool composure she had shown in the Roosevelt room. "I did not escalate," I answered. That was all she said. Later that night, one of her aides brought over a list of the most aggressive online comments. Death. Threats, ugly slurs, the kind of hatred that always rises when a black woman holds her ground publicly. The aide hovered, unsure whether to show her. She did not flinch. "Are they credible?" "No," the aide said. "Security's handling it. Nothing local." Then I do not need to read them, Jasmine replied. If they did not scare me off at 21 when I took my first defense case, they are not going to scare me now. That is not to say it did not wear on her. The hardest part was not the hate. It was the exhaustion. Every word she spoke was dissected, filtered through headlines, clipped into out-of-context quotes. Every interview required perfect posture. Every answer needed balance. But then came the letters. Again and again, from parents, from veterans, from middle schoolers who had never watched C-SPAN in their lives. One came from a retired Republican educator in rural Idaho. I do not agree with all your policies, but I agree with how you carry yourself. You reminded me what public service can look like. That one she kept, folded neatly and tucked into her notebook. Her mother called that weekend. Jasmine picked up on the third ring. I watched it again this morning, her mother said. I still do not know how you kept your face straight. Jasmine laughed quietly. Neither do I. You made us proud, baby. Should not cry it all week, but after. She hung up. She sat down in the dark of her living room and let the tears come. Quiet, heavy ones. It's not out of sadness, but from the pressure of holding so much steady for so long. She did not let herself sit in it for more than 5 minutes. By Monday, she was back at work, because the real fight was not on television. It was in the school budgets she was trying to fix, in the legislation sitting in committee that could change how children ate, learned, and grew up. The media would move on, but she would not. The following week, Jasmine made a visit she insisted on making herself without cameras or press releases. Thomas Jefferson Middle School in Oak Cliff. A plain brick building between an old grocery store and a tire shop, paint chipping from years of Texas sun. This was not a photo opportunity. She did not tell the school ahead of time. She just showed up. Principal Reyes met her at the door, slightly flustered but smiling. You are causing quite a stir, she joked, leading Jasmine through the halls. Students peeked out of classroom windows, whispering to each other, eyes wide. A few waved. Jasmine waved back softly like she always did. They ended up in a social studies class where students were watching a replay of the White House Education Summit. The teacher paused the video just before Jasmine's response. Would you like to finish it live? The teacher asked. Jasmine did not hesitate. Let us finish it together. She looked at the class of 7th graders. A mix of kids from different backgrounds, some leaning forward, others slouched in the back like they did not want to seem too interested. But she could feel their curiosity, the quiet kind. You see, this room? She asked, looking around. Every decision that affects this school is made in another room. One with polished tables, big folders, people in suits who may never walk into a school like this. The students stayed silent, listening. I do not look like most of the people in that room, and I did not grow up thinking I would ever sit at that table. But when I did, when I got there, they told me I did not belong. She paused just long enough. I did not shout. I did not storm. Out. I stayed because my job is not to make people comfortable. It is to represent the ones who never get an invitation. A boy in the back raised his hand. Were you scared? Jasmine smiled. I was not scared of him. I was scared of wasting the moment. That answer stuck. The teacher later told her to students, quoted it in their journal entries the next day, 10 days after the infamous exchange. Jasmine walked back through the West Wing entrance of the White House. This time, the air felt different. Heavier, but not with tension, with recognition. Staffers did not look past her anymore. They looked at her. Some nodded quietly. A few looked down, trying to stay neutral. But the shift was real. Respect does not always come with applause. Sometimes it shows up as silence when no one interrupts you. She had been invited to a follow-up session on early learning legislation. This time, a much smaller private strategy meeting with 4 key legislators and the president's senior education advisor. The invite simply read, "Continuing the conversation." Inside, the chairs had been rearranged. No nameplates, no formality, just a circle of people and a notepad on the table. The senior White House policy aide stepped in, briefcase in hand. "No cameras today," he said plainly. "Just discussion. The president will not be joining, but he will be briefed." No one commented. Jasmine did not flinch. They got to work. The conversation was less combative than before, but not warm. They debated funding models, teacher retention, the politics of testing mandates. It was not easy, but Jasmine had not come for easy. She came with numbers, real ones, about how many schools in her district relied on Title I grants just to keep their doors open. About children who were already behind by the time they reached second grade. Midway through, Senator Kelman spoke up. "I will be honest," he said. "I do not always agree with your methods, but your data is hard to argue with." Jasmine did not let it soften her tone. "It is not about methods. It is about whether we are okay letting zip codes decide opportunity." By the time Congress went into recess, the revised education funding bill was gaining traction. Slowly, carefully, but it was moving. It included new language on equity audits, baseline infrastructure standards for public schools, and dedicated mental health support for districts under Title I. Small wins on paper, but massive in practice. She did not claim them as hers. She was not that kind of politician. Every interview she redirected credit back to her constituents. "I do not make change by myself," she said during a radio call-in. "I carry the stories of the people who sent me here. I just refuse to drop them." The weeks passed, but the moment did not fade like most viral things do. Jasmine's words kept resurfacing on signs at protests, in speeches at school board meetings, even in sermon quotes from pulpits, in places she had never been. A community center in Tucson painted a mural with her now famous quote. A group of high schoolers in Jackson started a podcast called The Room. It's dedicated to interviewing people who had been told they did not belong and stayed anyway. But Jasmine was not thinking about legacy, not yet. She was thinking about the work that remained. In one of her last interviews before the summer break, a host asked her, "Do you think what happened in that room with the president changed anything permanently?" Jasmine paused, then said, "It did not change everything, but it made people look." Twice, it reminded folks that belonging is not granted. It is earned at the ballot box and protected by showing up again and again, even when you are told you do not fit. Then she added, "What matters now is what we do next." The host leaned forward, "And what are you doing next?" She smiled just a little. "I have still got work to do, and I have still got children back home waiting on books, buses, and teachers who do not quit mid-year. I will rest when they stop needing me." There was no applause, no dramatic music cue, just quiet understanding. Because when someone speaks from a place that is deeper than politics, you do not have to agree with them, to respect them. Jasmine Crockett walked into a room where she was told she did not belong. She did not raise her voice. She did not slam her fists. She stayed, she spoke, and then she got to work. And in doing so, she reminded the country of something it often forgets. Sometimes the most powerful thing a person can do is refuse to leave the room. If you have ever been told you are too loud, too soft, too different, or too real for the spaces you are in, remember this: the room does not make your voice valid. You do. Do not let anyone tell you otherwise.